All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for planning for and executing a smooth IBMI migration to the cloud. Just a quick reminder, if you do have any questions, please put these in the Q&A tab. We will get to these at the end of the session. And if we do not, we will make sure that any questions that go unanswered do get answered in our live Q&A tomorrow. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Larry. Larry, it's all you.
All right. Thank you. Kind of missed the people wandering in the room and, saying hi and whatever, but, hello. I'm Larry Bolhuis, IBM Infrastructure Advisor for Service Express. And one of the things that I've been doing for now actually a decade, is moving customers from an on-prem machine, whether completely or just as an HADR environment, is moving them into a cloud environment. And so done a whole bunch of these things. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now I just have to get my mouse on the right screen so that it'll move forward. There we go. So utilizing cloud can be a great option for IBMI, and it sounds simple. And reality is that at the core it is. But lots of things to think about. And some of them, way back a decade ago, we didn't necessarily think of them all correctly at the beginning either. And so the idea here is to get you comfortable with knowing the bits and the pieces, because there's different ways to do this too. And each business is unique. One size definitely does not fit all here. And so we're going to go through that process. So here's our agenda. And I'm not going to read through the agenda now, obviously, because we're going to go through these different pieces. So let's get started with why. Why would I move my IBMI to the cloud? Well, one of the things that every cloud provider on the continent, well, forget that, we're multi-continent, on the globe, they're going to tell you, you get what you need, you can scale at any time, and you can buy fractional units. We were just talking yesterday between myself and a coworker about what's the difference amount of CPW on a Power 6 machine, which we were pretty proud of at the time. That's about 4,200-ish CPW for a single processor core. Power 10, 22,000. That's massive, right? Most of you probably didn't scale your business to that rate. Now, some of you certainly did. Some of you added new cool capability to your software and ever, but frequently we find customers go, hey, I don't really need 22,000 CPW, really. So you could buy less, right? Additionally, when you look at things like disk space and memory, the increments when you're buying a machine in your own data center can be very lumpy. And if you miss it by a little bit, you may have to replace stuff, right? So move to the cloud, buy a little, buy a lot, buy more tomorrow, whatever. Freeing up data center space, power and cooling, that may or may not be a big target. We talk to a lot of customers now who are saying, look, my business wants to get out of the data center business. We're not that. We have a business to run. We provide this or that. We do this service. We don't really care about running computers. Can you run our computers for us? That can be perfect. A classic case in ours, we had a customer whose generator was leaking, the air conditioner died, and the UPS was beyond the end of maintenance. Replacing those three things alone would have paid for, I think, their first 4 years of cloud. And that didn't count running them. That was just the cost to physically replace them. They're in our cloud now, right? Additionally, it's pretty much a steady, predictable spend. Now it becomes an operational expense. We know we're paying this much for cloud. And if we need more, we just dial that up a little bit, right? Versus, every 3 years, we got to get a new system. Staffing. In many cases, you can delegate your systems management and your operations to your cloud provider. And Service Express, clearly no different there. We find, and I started out as a programmer. That was where I began my career on 34. I've been an admin and a systems guy now for the past 20 years or more. And I find more and more at small shops, especially, the guy that wears the admin hat is the developer. And sometimes it might even be an operations guy. And he doesn't wear that hat very much. He keeps it on the hat rack because he doesn't want to do that, right? He's got a real job to do. So that can be a big deal. Additionally, 24-hour support. Most good data center and hosting providers have that. Many times it's even a phone number you can call 24 hours a day and actually get a live person. And that includes holidays and weekends and snow days and all the other things that you get, right? Another thing that comes off the table is that physical system stuff, right? Hardware upgrades, maintenance, used to be cache batteries were a thing, but we still have, disk units. Who knows what goofy little things are going to fail in a computer? But now it's the cloud provider's computer, and they get to handle that for you. So very much a big difference can be had there in your comfort level, right? You don't have to worry about that. You're off golfing or whatever it is that you like to do, and your system's being handled by your provider. Another thing is upgrades. That whole hardware upgrade thing where, somebody comes out with boxes and boxes of parts and lots of cables, and there's always one silly thing missing, right? Seems like there's always one thing. But now those upgrades, even the operating system upgrade, use the experts at your provider, right? I couldn't even tell you how many upgrades our staff has done in the last 5 years. It's unbelievable. So we know what to expect. We have very, very well baked checklists. Check this, check this, check this, check. Oh, that's a problem. Let's fix that first, right? Let's get it right before we make a mess. Additionally, higher level of redundancy. And this may not be a big deal, but it's like so many things. You have insurance on your house in case it burns down. I hope none of you've had your house burned down. I've not had my house burned down, but I know people who had their house burned down. They had insurance. It's a good thing, right? You want to have that, but it's nice when somebody else has that, right? So we have all of that insurance, and insurance in this case is things like redundant power, redundant cooling, redundant communications, redundant staffing. How many of you have multiple admins these days, right? So all of these things, if you look at a good data center, not only is it redundant power, we think a lot of times redundant power of, well, there's 2 power supplies in the back of the system. And that's good because if one fails, the other runs it. Yay. But what are those things plugged into? Are they plugged into the same power strip with a switch on? No, I didn't say that. You don't have a switch on your power strip. Are they in at least 2 different PDUs? How about those PDUs? Where they plug into? Maybe the same UPS, right? Or some people plug into one into UPS, one side into the wall. Okay. How about 2 different UPSs? How about if those UPSs are each backed up by separate generators, right? So completely redundant power all the way to sources. So that's better. Same thing for cooling. Most small customers just don't have dual air conditioning in their computer room. When the one fails, they open doors and they start fans, right? So that sort of thing. Communications. The badly driven car goes through the power pole, takes down the power. Oh, yep, I got a generator. Oh, wait, my fiber was on that pole. I'm down too. Okay, how do you fix that? And of course, staffing is expense, right? So those are all better done by a provider and easier for them to do than it is for you in your own data center. All right, so let's look at some of the services that cloud providers can provide. Clearly, there's going to be, monitoring the servers and the routers and the power because that's all our stuff now, right? Your data center provider has all that. But we can reach in and look at QSysOp or look at QHIS, look at other message queues and such. So those are things your provider can set up and have that automatically notify your provider, who then can deal with most of the things and just report to you later, this happened, we did this, okay, rather than having to call you. So you win the pillow time war there, right? You get to go ahead and sleep through the night. We often joke that IBM administrators sleep well with a Safe 21 beneath their pillow. And that's a true statement, but how about you don't even have to deal with that stuff, right? And even without managed services, typically problems are identified quickly, especially anything that has to do with the system itself. Um, Truly, they can take over the whole system, right? So not only are they going to help you and do your upgrades and do your PTFs and make sure your backups are good, and that those are running routinely, but also dealing with those messages, right? The old infamous press ready or start on printer P1. Yeah, they can't really do that, but I don't know if you actually have a printer that has a start button on it anymore, right? We're talking about application issues. A message came up and said this file is full, or this action didn't complete, right? Now they can work a checklist and then only contact somebody when it's absolutely needed. Plus, I don't know, my hair's a little gray, huh? Um, I might retire sometime. How about your administrator? When they leave, and maybe they don't even retire, maybe they just decide, hey, I'm going to get another job. Finding administrators not such an easy thing. Your provider probably has a team of them. Okay, so you don't end up stuck doing everything yourself for a while. So being able to manage the whole system. Then there's replication. And this is another thing that really, to be a cloud vendor, you got to have some ability to replicate that system in some manner, at least, to provide whether it's disaster recovery or whether it's HA. Okay. There's all kinds of software replications. If you're in this space, you've probably heard of Mimics. Many of you maybe even run Mimics. It's kind of the Cadillac of software replication options because it works. And that ability to use Mimics to replicate to another system, preferably at least in another city, right? So that in the case of a disaster at your provider, you can, pick up and continue running at another site. Then there's hardware replication, typically done by a SAN, but PowerHA GeoMirror actually can do that as well, where the entire sysbase is replicated to another piece of hardware in another city. Okay, so you've got two complete copies of your machine at all times. And in that case, even when you do PTS and upgrades, the replication continues, right? So all of that stuff stays in sync. A step back from that, if you don't absolutely need that, virtual tape replication, VTL, we refer to it quite often. In that scenario, now we have your backups are done, and then those virtual tapes are replicated off to another city. Okay, so that's an option where we would have to still recover you in that other location, but we have those tapes. And VTLs, of course, are lovely for that, because as soon as your backup's done, the replication can begin. And that's much better than waiting until Monday when the administrator comes in, goes over to the tape drive, finally pulls the tape out. It might sit on a desk for a while. How long does it take to actually get to another city? And the beauty, we like to say, of VTLs, they work on weekends. They work on holidays, snow days, sick days. They just work, right? So a big advantage there, but lesser cost than a Mimics or a hardware replication. Upgrades, as we mentioned, of course, the cloud vendor is going to do the hardware stuff because they own it, right? So if you need to get the customer or the vendor needs to do some maintenance on the system, that's all taken off your plate. But can also handle things like doing PTFs, right? Loading new license programs that you might need, providing keys and other services, and complete IBMI upgrades. So again, it's a thing that you don't need to handle yourself. So that's a great service that your providers can handle. PTFs, as we mentioned, if your vendor can't do PTFs, then they're kind of falling by the wayside, right? And for the most part, PTFs are continuously downloaded. We keep stacks that are available to all our partitions. You don't even have to copy the PTFs to the partition. There's a magical network-based virtual optical. You just vary it on, boom, PTFs, right? So, and I call that table stakes. If your vendor can't do this, then they're really not, they really don't understand IBMI. And there could be a cost involved, of course, and you may have a schedule. You might want to do them quarterly, every 6 months, whatever. But again, that's something that's worked out to support your business. So what kind of things do you want to consider for this migration? This is really a big deal because when you look at it, you start with redundancy, right? As you look at the system, you're going to have a different IP address. Now some of you are going, let's see, when we put in ACS, did we put in the system's IP address or did we put in the DNS name? Hopefully you did DNS name. And some of you are going, no, we put in IP address. So one of the various things that you need to do is right from the start, even before the actual migration, okay, is to fix that DNS problem, right? Get it set so that everybody is using DNS. And I'm not talking about using the host table entry because that's a problem, okay? You need to make sure that it's done by DNS. Most of you have some sort of a Windows environment. In there are domain controllers. The domain controller is probably running your DNS. And so you can go in and make sure that the FQDN for your system is correct in there, because that way, when you get to the system or the migration period, then what happens is you change that FQDN and it now points to the cloud IP. Okay. And it changes everybody at once. Much, much better. Okay. Now, how do you get to that connectivity to the cloud? And this is typically the longest, what we call time to solve issue, is getting that connectivity from your site to our site or your cloud provider. And the challenge there is understanding the environment. Okay. So if you're a small company and you've got one facility, and today your power system, your IBMI lives in, it could even sit next to somebody's desk, right? Could be that simple. Yes, those customers do exist, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that one site, you're probably going to have the simplest solution. We typically will use an IPsec tunnel, and that comes back to us. Okay. Now, you have to think through that whole process, because in the whole deal, if you miss pieces, oh, we've got that one old printer that's still on TwinX. What? Right? And we do see this from time to time. We get calls from customers literally that have machines so old they have TwinX. And the reason they're calling half the time is the thing is dying or a drive is dying and they can't get parts anymore. Right? You got to solve those things, because communicating to that TwinX printer generally involves removing the TwinX printer. Right? Let's put in something real in there that's connected through TCP. But the other thing that we have to have is some redundancy, because if you think about it, the system is now in a cloud. If you can't get to the cloud, then the system is down, right? When we talk about networking and stuff, people never call you and say, hey, the network's broke. No, they say the system's down. But the system may be happily running, you just can't get to it. And, so that's what do they call it? A difference without a distinction without a difference. Okay. It doesn't matter to me. I can't get to the system. I'm going to use the words I want. So you need to have some flavor of a backup in that scenario, right? Whether that's VPN dial-in type clients, right? Where you use your cell phone as a hotspot and connect in that way, or you have a backup connection, right? Even from my house, I have fiber to a pole over here. And then on that end of the house, I have a big tower with antennas on it that gives me wireless connectivity all the way back to a point. So redundant connections, all right, very critical when you're dealing with your office. If you have multiple offices or multiple facilities, then everything gets another level of complicated, right? Because you got to deal with all of them. Now, another thing to think about is backups, right? I'm not aware of a single cloud provider that uses physical tape for their backups. Why would you do that, right? They use virtual tape libraries. Which brand of virtual tape library, that's a preference thing, capability thing. But the virtual tape libraries, not only are they generally faster, and they have that ability to deduplicate data. So you back up your 500 gigabyte system, that thing may only take, we see it as low as 5 gigs, right? 100 to 1 dedupe, right? Amazing. So that makes a big difference. But they can also then replicate that data offsite. And of course, when you have that 100 to 1 dedupe, the offsite replication is only that 5 gig. Much, much better than having to send a whole 500 gig file. Additionally, cloud providers, most of them are going to have the ability to say, hey, you know what? How about we don't kick your users off? How about we flash copy your system in the SAN, right? And we do a backup of that flash copy. Wouldn't that be kind of cool? So you're getting a full save 21 without anybody getting kicked off the system. That's awesome, right? And that's a technology that most of your providers are going to have. Remote copy is that ability we mentioned where that data is replicated on the fly from your operating machine to another one in another city and kept current all the time. And then, hey, could that remote copy maybe happen over there? That'd be kind of cool. But then the backup's done over there, right? So what happens when Silly Sally in accounting smashes a file? The tape's over there. Oh, no, no, no. It's virtual tape. So as soon as the backup was done, it replicated back to the production site. So even though the backups are done over there, the tape's over here by the time you get in the office anyway. And so we can fix Sally's problem, right? So all of these things you need to understand and need to understand if you need that level, okay? Always it's the menu, right? What choices do you really need? Connectivity, as we mentioned, for small companies, typically that IPsec to a single location. And then you also need to understand, do you have other servers? We are finding this frequently now, where you have other servers that you've moved to AWS or Azure, or Google, whatever, and you said, but my IBMI needs to talk to those. Well, where are those clouds set? How do we get to those? So you need to understand your cloud provider has to be able to provide that. And that can be done in multiple ways. Those providers also allow us to build IPsec tunnels. So we could say, hey, we want to IPsec into your little slice of AWS, and your IBMI can now talk to those servers over there. Other cases, you say, oh, no, I can't have an IPsec tunnel. I got to do something bigger and faster because I have a much bigger system. Well, there's options out there as well. We have providers co-located in our data centers that will provide us links, multiple gigabit direct fiber. Cool. Is that as cheap as an IPsec tunnel? Of course not. Is it faster? Oh, yes, right? Again, you dial up what you need when you go to the cloud. But these are things that have to be considered, because if you didn't think of that and you move your system to the cloud and you find out you can't communicate to those Windows servers, then that's a problem, right? Redundancy. How redundant do you need to be? Some of those things, table stakes, right? Provider's going to get you redundant power and redundant cooling and those bits. They're going to have redundant networking, and those are things that just you have to have, and they're going to be there. And sure, ask your provider, do you do all these things redundantly? They better give you the thumbs up. However, you can get beyond that, right? Do you need, the ability to replicate your data to another site, as we mentioned. Do we need to have that remote copy? Should it be a Mimics? What level of redundancy in your data? Do we require redundant SANs? Any of those kind of things. Do you know what DB2 Mirror is? Very cool. Very expensive because it doubles everything. But do you need that? Is that a capability that's required by your business? I don't know if you saw this, but just the other day, Alaska Airlines, sorry, you can't fly. Why? Because for a short time, they had a disconnect between the computers that told them how heavy their planes were and the pilots. So they couldn't say, when you put this plane with this much fuel, this many people, and this much baggage, it weighs this amount. Is that okay or not okay? Well, and you can't have that information, then you can't fly your planes, right? From what I understand, it wasn't actually a system failure, it was a communication failure. But what if it was a system failure? Now what do you do, right? So that's a higher level of upgrade that you need, okay, than somebody who's only using their system to ship widgets, right? You could probably be down. And as I mentioned before, when the network is down, people don't say, "Hey, the network's down." They say the system is down, right? So we have to make sure that that network is appropriate for your environment. Some of you say, and I've worked with many customers, "Oh, we could be down for a day, no problem." Okay, whether that's fact or fiction, it's what they believe, and the customer is right. Now, typically when they're down for a day, after that, they'll want it to be fixed and they won't want it to be as uh, they won't want it to take a day the next time, right? Um, so it's a lot like insurance. How much insurance do you buy, right? Because you may have very reliable network in your area. You may know that, right? You work in other areas. We have one customer that's a farmer's co-op, and their network connectivity comes from an antenna way up at the top of the elevator. And this is, if you're not familiar with farmers elevators, that's that great big tall tower on the top of those great big silver tanks out there, those big grain bins. And every now and then something happens to that thing. Well, they lose their connectivity then, right? So what's their backup plan? Is it important enough to have one? Okay. All right, so let's look at some of those connection options. So obviously, you could just open ports to the internet. Hopefully, I don't need to tell you that that's a really crappy idea. Um, there's just so much out there today. If I showed you just a snippet of my firewall logs, the number of hits against the outside of the firewall of people just trying to find open ports is flatly insane. So, even if you just change your port number, oh, instead of port 23, we'll use port 2300 because, what could go wrong? They'll find that in seconds. Okay. And now you've got all kinds of risks. Now you may say, okay, well, I'll use TLS instead. Okay. At least you've got some protection there. But now you're putting all of that work on your IBMI, and some protocols actually, don't work so well over TLS anyway. So really not recommended. The go-to for most small companies is that IPsec tunnel. Okay. We create a VPN tunnel. We try to configure that with IPv2. If you're not familiar with IPsec tunnel connectivity and stuff, there's really IPv1 depreciated and IPv2 current. That's the summary at a high level. And, we'll set up those tunnels between your site and our site. And, we use one vendor hardware, you use a different vendor hardware. Typically doesn't matter. Those are standards, right? It's the low cost because you already have firewalls and networking. We already have firewalls and networking. It's high security because that thing is encrypted and those keys, flip every so often, and that's different for every connection. So, the odds that somebody's going to hack into that are pretty low. It's going to take a high effort for a low gain. Now, it's important that you have significant bandwidth. or sorry, sufficient bandwidth. And where you can get burned on that, for example, is let's say you have cable for your internet provider. Quite often with cable, you'll have nice download speeds. So you can go watch YouTube or Netflix or whatever, but really crappy upload speeds. Now, if you're using only green screens in your application still, that's probably still fine because I don't know about you, but I can't type faster than the upload speed on a cable internet connection. And even a whole bunch of your people probably can't do that. But if you're using your IBMI as the net server for sharing documents and that sort of thing, then those uploads can become a problem in that case. So we like to have a symmetrical type of connection preferred, an Ethernet drop or a fiber, that kind of a connection, as opposed to an asymmetrical connection like fiber or like uh, cable internet. The old DSL was the same problem, right? I don't know if DSL exists much anymore, but your downloads were good, your uploads were pretty crappy. And as we mentioned, the basic green screen, that thing is super low need. If any of you remember using a green screen on a modem, it actually didn't suck that bad. Paging down a lot of screens was kind of slow, but just using a screen, this just really wasn't bad. You start getting into heavier use where you've got a good web screens and that makes a big difference. So you definitely need to get appropriate bandwidth there. Now, when you're dealing with multiple facilities, as I mentioned before, if you only have one facility and you have one link, probably not horrible. You still want to have that backup link, right? But in a star connection for multiple facilities, and this is very interesting, we have calls with the customer that are coming onto our cloud. And we say, all right, how do you want to do this? Do you want to have one connection from us to your corporate, and then you connect all your other facilities to corporate? Well, that's awesome, right? Frankly, I love it because I got to create one connection. Except what happens if corporate goes down? The poorly driven truck, the poorly flown airplane, whatever issue happens, and corporate goes away. All the rest of your facilities still want to do business, right? How do they get here if they have to get through corporate? Almost immediately, nearly every single customer goes, oh, well, let's go to multipoint. Let's connect an IPsec tunnel to each of our facilities. That way, if one goes down, it's only that one facility, okay? And generally, the cost to add those additional points is pretty minimal. So most people go, yeah, let's do that. Now, I don't like it as much from a configuration perspective and a monitoring perspective because I may have a customer now with 7, 8, or 9 locations instead of just a single connection. But at least this does reduce the opportunity for all of them to be knocked out at once. Sure, the total number of options for a failure goes up, but the odds that we're going to take out your entire customer or all of your facilities goes way down. And if you don't know what backhoe fade is, you need to look up the T-shirt that is the IT person's curse. It says, "May the fiber optic seeking, laser guided, computer controlled backhoe spend a month in your neighborhood." Right? You don't want that guy, right? It's amazing how fast backhoes can find fiber. Now you step up a little, right? Now you get to private links, okay? And private links, we have customers with this. They've chosen, we want a dedicated link from our facility to your facility. Okay, cool. We can provide that. Most providers can provide that, right? And that gives you generally a faster link because now it's not hopping around routers on the internet. It's a direct link. Typically higher bandwidth, typically lower latency. And for those of you that don't know what latency is, that's the amount of time it takes a packet to get from one end to the other. And latency in many cases is more important than bandwidth. If you have really crappy latency, it kind of doesn't matter how fast the pipe is. It still takes forever for traffic to flow. And so that can be a big improvement. Now, some customers, for example, we had a customer come in this past year, and in our conversation, they said, or I asked, so how many locations do you need to connect? And they said 85. I went, no, not doing 85. Sorry, that's insane. They said, what if we send you a router and put you on our MPLS? 2 thumbs up on that solution, because now our facility becomes part of your cloud, your network cloud, right? And so now that device is managed by your communications provider. It has a drop into our network. This is generally a wonderful thing because now it's all managed. Somebody who knows what they're doing. We only have one connection to deal with. It's part of your cloud. And if you add locations, anybody who's got 85 locations probably is adding and removing locations relatively frequently, right? So adding and removing locations doesn't impact your cloud provider. It's a normal part of your business, okay? Now, that could also be a completely private network. That's not as likely. But you add those locations very easily. And in some cases, we have customers with multiples of these devices, one in each of 2 different facilities. So if one of them goes down, they can still connect to the other one. So that provides yet another piece of redundancy in the whole setup. Okay. So that's starting to get into customers that have higher uptime requirements and more numbers of locations. And redundant link, no matter what, you got to consider redundancy. A single link can fail. It doesn't matter. And we can go through all kinds of potential failures. I do a whole presentation called Tales from the Data Center. A lot of those are connectivity kinds of things. And it's just kind of funny. I mean, I read every article I see about connectivity problems because they're legion. And sometimes that means redundant providers. And absolutely try not to run on the same last mile. It's just, I mean, who does that, right? It's actually rather funny. I had a customer for many years whose facility was actually what the building it's now our corporate headquarters. And they had chosen 2 different providers for their networks because one provider ran fiber out that end of the building and the other provider ran copper out this end of the building. And so they submitted this to their corporate, which was out west somewhere. And they were told, yep, okay, the providers are bringing in your connectivity. Then one day, after everything's up and running, and I was actually there that day, we lost connectivity. And if you walk to the window, you could actually look across this pond and you could see a backhoe and these guys staring in a hole. We're like, well, that's bad. But why did we lose both connections? Yep, turns out corporate, at that point it was my customers, corporate, had chosen not to pick this fiber because it was more money. They chose 2 different providers, both which ran on that last copper, which was now whacked by the guy with the backhoe. So, not very well laid out plan there. Don't do that. Now, sometimes you don't have a choice, right? At the time I picked fiber for my house, I only had fiber over here. Now, even though I live out in the boonies, I got fiber on that corner of my lot and fiber on that corner of my lot. Well, isn't that hilarious? I still have the tower because I'm not hooking up to 2 fiber companies. But it's that redundancy because remember, the machine's not on your premise anymore. All right. Ways to move your data to the cloud. How are you going to get there? So, ye old tape, gold standard. We've had it forever, and I'm going to bet you're running LTO. And if you're not running LTO, you know who you are. You probably got 1/4-inch cartridge. And if you don't have 1/4-inch cartridge, you probably got 8mm. Oh, I hope not. But you know what? I got a whole stack of tape drives. I can hook up almost anything. So I can read your tape. You can send me a tape. I can pull it in. As soon as I get it restored, then we're going to go to VTL for backups, right? But you're going to create a tape. You know what's on your tape. You can send it FedEx, UPS. We've had people courier it, right? Some people with their data, they're saying, no, nope, nope. It has to be literally the guy walks up to the door, shows his ID. We let him in. He's got a little case. He unlocks it. We take a picture between the two of us that we transfer the tape. We sign the documents. The guy goes home. Yay, we've done this. It works. It can be faster too, because depending on where you're going, as soon as the tape's done, you get on an airplane. But of course, the further you're going with that, the longer it's going to take, up to a point. And it's typically only a daily type of option, right? Now, a better or faster is virtual tape replication. So in that case, what we do is we say, okay, we'll provide a virtual tape library, hook it up to your on-prem system. You do backups to that. Those tapes are then replicated to us. Now, once the first few tapes are replicated, now we've pretty much got all your data. And so further tapes, because of deduplication, vastly reduce that data to transmit. As we mentioned before, if you had 100-to-1 deduplication, and that's not out of the question, you're only sending 1% of your data. Now, distance matters due to latency, but certainly less than with that tape that's got to go on an airplane. And of course, it also means that the second that backup is done, replication can begin right then. You don't have to wait for the tape to kick out of the drive and for it to go in a box and drive to an airport or a UPS or whatever. So this can make a huge difference, right? For customers that, yeah, I can have some hours of outage, but I don't want to be down for 2 days for this, okay? So this is an option that really can help you move much more quickly if you can still stand an outage. Now, let's make it quicker still, all right? Let's say I can't have an outage. I can't afford an outage. What if you do something like software replication? You know, the Mimics, Itera, Mixava, Quick EDD, whatever, pick your tool. We happen to use Mimics because we're a Mimics partner. But, you know, it doesn't really matter which one. In that case, your data is kept in sync. So you're going to make a connection. You're going to start replicating. Perhaps with Mimics, you're going to send us a tape, right, to seed the system. Not mandatory, but not a bad idea. So now that thing comes in and it stays in sync. So we're rolling through the data. We're staying in sync. And now when it's time to cut over, we do a role swap. We make our site production. Your site becomes HA. Okay. You do your validation steps, whatever those are. Once you said, yep, validation passes, then we go live in the cloud and we turn off replication, right? Because it's no longer needed. Another option is SAN replication, right? Or PowerHA GeoMirror. The setup is simpler because and this is typically requires that you already have a SAN. We're not going to send you a SAN because they've got to migrate you to SAN first, right? But now we're going to let your SAN replicate the data to our SAN. And once the data is all here, we do the same things we do for software. We reverse that replication, right? That limit of one IP partner was just lifted by IBM, so I need to fix that bullet. If your SAN is new enough and has the correct code, you can have multiple IP partners now. So that's better. SAN replication, though, is more sensitive to latency than software replication. If you have high latency, your replication could fall behind. So you may have to shut down your system at your site and wait some minutes, which, you know, hey, that could be an hour, 2 hours even, for that replication to catch up. However, it's still going to be faster than the UPS, FedEx type of thing, or you getting in a car unless you live close to the data center that you're moving to. So those are options for getting your data into the cloud. Now, for some very small systems, and we actually have some that we've done this with, the systems are so small, they first send us a tape. that we use that tape to seed the system. And then when we go live, we just have them create some save files, FTP them across that IPsec tunnel, right? Or SSH using SCP, for example. And then we just, send them over and restore them. We absolutely have done that. Our smallest customer actually sent us their entire Save 21 on a USB stick. Yes, they did. If your system's that small, it can work, right? So all depends on the size of your system. All right, validating the cloud implementation. Obviously, you don't want to just put the blinders on and and duck, right? Obviously, you're going to need to test your connectivity. Can your users get on? Do your printers print? Are your file shares working if you're using those, right? Do you use Kerberos or single sign-on? Is that connected? Can you do your FTPs and your SSHs? For example, we were talking to a customer just yesterday. Hey, we're seeing these things in your firewall logs. Oh, yeah, that's our connection to our EDI provider. Oh, good. That's working then. Yes, excellent, because most customers that use EDI would like it to work. So you want to test all those. Do you have stuff in Amazon or Google's cloud, whatever? Make sure we can make all those connectivities. These types of tests, right, are pretty much all done prior to the cutover at all, right? As a consequence of that, those things can be fixed. This is not the type of testing you're going to do on the day of the cutover. You might validate they're still correct, but you're probably not going to do those things on the day of the cutover for the first time. That's not going to work. Do you want to do those tests over your backup connections? Right? Do you want to move? Do you have a backup connection? You want to test that thing. Let's make sure that works as well. But when it gets time to cut over, right, we're going to say, hey, we think our data's in your cloud. How do you prove it? Right? And different customers have different ways. Okay. Some say, hey, I'm going to take certain key files and I'm going to do some totals. Maybe I'm going to do checksums on some tables. Maybe I'm just going to count active records. Yep. The history file has 2.7 million records. That's correct. Whatever. Okay. From an IBMI perspective, we know that restores work and you get messages when they fail, right? So just from a data perspective, we're pretty confident, okay, that the restores actually worked. But that's not the whole picture, because if I tell accounting, oh yeah, I've got the right number of rows in the file, I'm good. And accounting comes back and says, yeah, well, accounts payable, the open payables report shows a different number. Do they care about the row count? Not so much. They care about the open payables total and the open receivables total and inventory valuation and other such things as that. Okay. Customers generally know their key reports, right? I used to run an IT department. We had certain reports we ran every month. We knew which reports had to say what numbers. We understood that. Most accounting and management, they know, look, work in process should be this value. We have this many orders on. We have this much inventory, whatever. Those are the things that you need to be comfortable with. And then, of course, that things work. Yes, I can get in this function and enter an order. Yes, I can get in these functions. Typically build a checklist, build a plan, right? Then integration, test all of that stuff, right? Again, do your printers print? Can your users get on? Do you have anything that controls machines in your facility? Do you have other cloud providers? All of these things. And this is where we find those undocumented connections. Like, I can't get to such and such. What do you mean? What is that? Well, remember when Bob hooked up blah, blah, blah? Oh, that. Right. Okay. So you may have to find some of those types of things. Okay. So yeah, it's definitely a full on make sure that everything your business needs to run your business is working, right? That's the important piece. You don't want to find that on a Monday morning when you move to the cloud on Sunday, that key pieces don't work. All right, so logical, possible, it makes sense to move IBM to the cloud for many, many customers. But I will tell you, don't move your IBM to a cloud that can't spell I. Tales from the data center, we've got them. Customer with a Power 5 just laying on the floor in the corner of the data center because the vendor couldn't figure out how to mount the thing in a rack. So they laid it on the floor where the brooms went by with the dust and stuff, right? Boo, right? If you don't have a plan, that's a plan to fail. So testing, how are you going to get there? When's it going to happen? What's your connectivity? All of that, right? Clearly, one size does not fit all. Absolutely. Some customers, man, we do have customers that don't have any VPN tunnels. They just use a few VPN clients on laptops. But if that works for you, that's great, right? Every cloud doesn't fit every customer. You may be too big for a given cloud or too small for a given cloud, but they definitely need to understand what you're doing. That is such a key thing. And absolutely come with expectations and come with questions. And if your cloud provider can't answer them, you got to move on, right? And while I have indeed in my career gone to customer meetings and answered the questions with answers like, we will use industry standard best practices, because the guy was trying to use his meetings to suck information out of his vendors without having to hire him. Okay. But when you're in a meeting with a potential cloud provider and they can't tell you the answer to your question, then you need to say, wait a minute, why aren't you answering my question? If they say, well, we need to do research to handle that specific thing, that's fine. Then have them do the research. But if they can't tell you what connectivity options they have, or they can't tell you what kind of capacities they can provide you, yeah, you got to be comfortable. It's really key. Now we do have a couple questions that have popped up. One question says, if I'm migrating from on-prem to cloud, how long is the process until I'm 100% functional? Well, I can tell you that our all-time record was 2 days. Customer's machine died. He panicked. He sent us a tape. While the tape was in transit, we put his we restored his, created connectivity. When his tape got here, we restored it and he went live. That's like an all-time record. Okay. However, generally speaking, the process is going to be in the 60-ish kind of days, because and that's for an average size customer, because you do have to make sure you get all those I's dotted and T's crossed. Do we do connectivity and all those kind of things, right? So that's a key thing. The actual cutover in most cases is a weekend, right? And typically not even an entire weekend. Okay, so that can be, and again, that varies a lot, very lot by size. Okay. The second question we have is, do we know of any Canadian providers? We actually are partnered with a Canadian facility. So if you're looking to host cloud in Canada, we can do that. So go ahead and reach out for us on that. We have live customers in Canada right now through a partner. We also have some pretty sharp Service Express employees in Canada. Another one, customer said they did a POC with a vendor moving to the cloud, and the question is, they had to place all scheduled jobs on hold, and they have 1,000 of them, and they wanted to save QDFT job. No, you don't. What you really want, if you email me, I can send you a tiny little CL program. There's 2 of them. The one does a dump, uses SQL to dump the job scheduler into a table, and then puts all those jobs on hold. And then the other